Reno, KFOY 1060. Phoenix, KKNT, AM 960, The Patriot. We are on 1030, The Voice in Tucson. KQNA, I've been on Tucson for 30 years, it feels like. Flagstaff, Prescott, 1130 AM, 99.9, 95.5. The reason I tell you this, and of course Salem News Channels everywhere in the country, I tell you this because my broadcasting for the next 57 days is heavily focused. I'm aware of other news. There's an enormous fire in San Bernardino, California, and it's 0% controlled and people are fleeing. And I know it's had a ridiculous early Santa Ana, and prayers for you folks. I am not ignoring you. I know it's fast moving. I know it's zero contained. And I realize that three Israelis were murdered by a Jordanian terrorist over the weekend. I know that. I also know that negotiators have pretty much given up on a deal with Hamas. They're finally figuring out Sinwar is just a sociopathic killer, and they're not going to be able to do anything except rescue those people by guns. So they're going to have to go into the tunnels again and again and again. There isn't going to be a deal. The GOP is going to announce today that the Afghanistan withdrawal was such a disaster, and it didn't have to be that way. They've been working on a report for more than a year, 250 pages long, and it's going to be just absolutely damning. And, of course, it's debate week, debate tomorrow night. I got all this stuff to cover, but what matters most is the election. We have 57 days. And if you haven't registered, you need to register, especially in these swing states, Wisconsin and North Carolina and New Hampshire, and maybe Maine. Maine 2nd District, they vote by 1st District, 2nd District. 1st District is blue, 2nd District is red. I hope you don't vote for Jared Golden. I know he's a sane Democrat, but you should vote for a Republican up there. I also know that Pennsylvania is the key to the election. That's why I'm so glad for Bold Gold Media and Talk Erie and our Salem Media affiliates there across the state. I'm also in Bedford, Pennsylvania. You cannot go anywhere in Pennsylvania and not run into me. And I'm here to tell you, Kamala Harris is going to stop fracking and kill your state. And it is that simple. Ohio's going to be red. But Detroit, you're listening to me in Detroit right now, or Grand Rapids, neck and neck. If you're listening to me in Las Vegas or Reno, anywhere in Nevada, neck and neck. Arizona, neck and neck. In fact, there were big polls this weekend that show exactly that. Kamala Harris, Donald Trump tied nationally and in the 7 swing states. So it's just tighter than a tick. And that's okay, because Harris is descending and Trump is ascending. And this is borne out by compilations in the Washington Post, the New York Times over the weekend, Real Clear Politics, average of polls. I'm hoping to get John Ellis on later today. Polls in one place, John Ellis. Why is she descending? Because she has to say something. She went on Univision podcast. All right. She can have any venue she wants. She can go on any show she wants. She's welcome here every day. Tim Walz is welcome here every day. Donald Trump and J.D. Vance have already done this program. She can go anywhere she wants. She goes on a podcast I literally have never heard of, Euphoria Radio with Edna Angel Baby Chapa, and says this inscrutable bit of word salad, cut 19.
Vice President Harris, still people believe that he can handle the economy better. What would you say to them that are listening to you right now? How could you change their minds that you could do it and even better?
Well, you should look at what I've accomplished thus far. The work that I've done, for example, that has resulted in Latino small businesses growing faster in this moment in history in these last 3.5 years than ever before, has a lot to do with the work that I have done to build up community banks and put more money into community banks so that those dollars can then get into the community and small businesses. Goldman Sachs, which is a very highly respected financial advisor and leader, has said that my plan will increase the gross national product and the GDP, and that Trump's plan would actually lower it. So these are objective analyses by some of the smartest economists in the country and in the world. And I just have to say this, is that you also have to look at this guy, he talks about being so rich. He inherited hundreds of millions of dollars from his father and went bankrupt 6 times. And I think that we know that when we look at somebody who actually has come from a working background and understands the needs of working people, that's when working people benefit.
I can't take any more of this. She is so desperate. She's attacking Trump for having money and for when some of his LCs went belly up, they went bankrupt, and that happens in the development business far more often than you know. And it's not like we haven't heard about that before. She got nothing. She's got nothing. She can't talk about policy. And word salad indicates that there's air blowing between the ears, but there's not much else impeding it. So it's like a windstorm in there. Meanwhile, Donald Trump in Wisconsin, cut number 17.
To every citizen who's sick and tired of the parasitic political class in Washington that sucks our country of its blood and treasure, November 5th will be your Liberation Day. November 5th this year will be the most important day in the history of our country, because we're not going to have a country
Voting
anymore.
has already begun. That's the key thing. And whether you're in Georgia or Pennsylvania or Nevada and Arizona, in Wisconsin and Michigan, voting has already begun. You Pennsylvanians, you can actually start voting, I think, in person in a week. But absentees are now going out, at least in Delaware and North Carolina. They start going out in Pennsylvania this week. Vote early. What does Kamala believe? Well, Bernie Sanders is her surrogate. Bernie Sanders on Meet the Press yesterday cut 33.
No, I don't think she's abandoning her ideals. I think she's trying to be pragmatic and doing what she thinks is right in order to win the election. My own view is slightly different. I think...
Got that? She's lying. She doesn't believe anything she's saying. She hasn't abandoned her values. She's still a lefty, a big-time lefty. Raphael Warnock, her other surrogate, also on Meet the Press, cut number 32.
Should she also be, in your opinion, supporting a mandatory gun buyback program?
Listen, we're not going to be able to get where we need to go without action in Congress. We've got to pass some laws to deal with this. Now, I was heartened by the fact that 2 years ago we finally did a gun safety law.
All right, so then he filibusters. Kamala is for a mandatory gun dispossession bill. She said so. She wants to get your weapons. I must tell you, fall has already come here, and I had a fun moment yesterday introducing the Fetching Mrs. Hewitt to the word frap, F-R-A-P-P-E. Now, because I went to college in Boston, I know that frap is how we refer to milkshakes up here, but she didn't know that. I don't think she's ever bought a milkshake in Maine before or in New Hampshire or Massachusetts. So we were at Wild Willie's in York, and it's a fabulous place. If you're listening on News Talk 98.5 WGAN and 560 AM, that's Portland. Big signal, covers southern half of Maine and northern half of New Hampshire. They all know about Wild Willie's, and they know all about fraps and stations in Massachusetts. Fraps. I don't know where the word came from. I assume it's got French origins. I don't know. Vic Mattis is the weekend editor of the Washington Free Beacon and the co-host of Getting Hammered, one of the country's most popular podcasts. Mary Catherine Ham and Vic, twice a week, make us laugh. Vic, I got to talk to you first. I got to give you a warning. On Mondays after a Browns loss, especially one as embarrassing and absolutely debilitating as yesterday's, I'm grumpy. I just want you to know, coming out of the box, Ohio State may have won 56-0, but the Browns got crushed. And you haven't even played yet, so you're a Jets fan, right?
No. I was a Redskins fan. I went to Georgetown. So the first year, year I started was the last year they won the Super Bowl, and I thought I'm going to get on.
But the good news
bandwagon.
is you have a quarterback that you're not paying $250 million to, unlike the Browns. You have a rookie quarterback, so I just wanted to warn you, Vic. I got to tell you, first day of school stories that you and Mary Catherine told you last week. Well, my granddaughter, Genghis Kate, took off from kindergarten like a character out of the Aubrey Matron series. Boarding axes and pistols, board away. You know, she was out the door and into the... there are kids who do not, they don't delay at the door. They're in there, right? They go for it. Were those yours?
Okay, well, again, my son, he was very quiet and very observant, as he always is, and he sort of just, quietly went along with the teacher in hand, and then And that was it. And he was fine. There's never been an issue. My daughter was very much like your granddaughter. Just get me in there because she sees all the other
Yeah.
kids. She sees what they're doing. They
Right.
want to be a part of that action, right?
Gosh, the window. If the window had been down, she might have gone out the window. All right, so that's that. Now I want to talk to you about DoorDash. And first, let's set this up. Both Vic and Mary Catherine had bad DoorDash experiences, unlike me, because I won't use DoorDash or Uber Eats, and I'll tell you why. I don't want somebody I don't know handling my food. I mean, they got absolutely zero interest in quality control. I went to a great burger place yesterday, Wild Willie's, famous up here in Maine, and it would be, there's got to be an equivalent near you, some place where you send everyone from out of town. If it gets into a car and drives over lunch, it's not Wild Willie's burger. It's somebody else's burger, and who knows what they're... I mean, I can't get over that. I guess I'm too old to adapt.
Yeah. Again, that's not. I tried it when it was first out, and it was like the new thing. You got to try DoorDash or Uber Eats or any of these other services, and it's a third party that's delivering the food for you. There is not the same incentive as a guy who works at the restaurant. The boss isn't going to be on you every time. That's the problem. The manager at the restaurant down the street had once told me, he said it drives him nuts because he gets customer complaints all the time. My food is cold. And he has no control over that because they're the ones coming in and they're, going to like multiple stops. And sometimes, like the story that I told, they just get lost, even though it's 2 blocks away.
I want to go into the story you told. You ordered 6 pizzas for the free beacon. That's 72 slices on the weekend. What do you got, a galley in there? Do you have galley slaves working 72 pieces of pizza?
We have hungry young staff writers, Hugh. They're in their 20s. They can put down a half a pie each, and so we and then maybe save a little bit for a snack for later. So it was a lot of pies. Again,
okay. My next question that arose.
Yeah.
They're all going to be youngsters. At least half of them are going to be youngsters. Why don't you say, Joe and Mary, you're walking down the street 5 minutes and getting the pies. Bring them back. We want them hot. Why wouldn't you do that? You're the boss on the weekend. At least you're the boss.
I did not know that we were getting the pizzas. Normally it's from a place that's further away. So I didn't know that if that were the case, I would have gotten the 2 most recent hires and said, okay, you want the free lunch. You got to go get it. Make it a team effort. Get 2-3 people. It is literally about 5 to 10 minutes away. So, but I'm not going to make any complaints. It wasn't me. I didn't make that decision. But now I hope we know better to do that.
Let's get serious. We had surrogate weekend on the Sunday shows. We had Tom Cotton, Doug Burgum, and Sarah Huckabee Sanders on the Big 3 versus Raphael Warnock and Bernie Sanders. Who wins the surrogate wars yesterday?
I think the former definitely over the latter. What did I just hear about Raphael Warnock saying that he was put in a position to have to argue in defense of policy positions from Kamala Harris dating back from 2019, and short of any real strong advice and guidance, I think he said that she still is going to be open to reparations. Did I miss that? Or it was about
you got it right. And gun grabbing, mandatory buybacks.
Mandatory
turn
buyback,
in your guns.
that's right.
And so Kamala 2019 is what Bernie was selling. Meanwhile, the effort is still going to make Donald Trump responsible for Project 2025. I've had Kevin Roberts on the show. 25truth.com is where people go to find out about Project 2025, 25truth.com. It's the same thing the Heritage Foundation has done forever, what their various scholars want, the people they'd like to see employed. It's got nothing to do with Donald Trump or his transition, but they're running with that. Do you think that is effective at all? I mean, it's like talking in Portuguese to most voters when you talk in shorthand like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if the Trump campaign spends enough to tell people or get out there to tell people that this is not the case, because the Harris campaign keeps on calling it Trump's Project 2025. It reminds me of like in 2012 when Democrats used to say, John Boehner's Tea Party. That never made any sense to me. That was never the case. And so it's the same thing. Again, as you mentioned, they've been putting this out since 1981, I think. It's like the mandate for leadership. Every 4 years, they have policy positions. As you mentioned, every think tank does it. It's 900 pages long, and somebody had the bright idea to say, you know what? Let's dig in that and tie it to Trump, even though it's a foundation, and that's what's going to work. I don't think that's going to work. Although, I mean, obviously, there's always going to be a certain segment of that population that's going to be just spouting off those particular talking points.
Now, Vic, you're a New Jersey guy. Did you grow up reading the New York Post or the Daily News, the New York Times? What did you grow up reading?
I'll throw you one even better: the Ocean County Observer and the Asbury Park Press. So we were very local, yeah. And the
Very
Ocean
local.
County Observer is, yes, it's defunct. The Asbury Park Press is still there, and so God bless those papers for doing it. I love the New York Post, though. That was always fun if you can get your hands on it at the local 7-Eleven.
So, the New York Post broke a story last week that there has been a Chinese spy, and not like an influencer, a Chinese spy working for Governor Hochul and before that Governor Cuomo. And I have seen this nowhere. I mean, indictment, federally indicted. This isn't like investigative reporting. They read the indictment. And the Chinese spy has been there for at least 4 years. And I'm thinking to myself, what's the worst a Chinese spy could do on the staff of a governor of the Empire State? Let your imagination run wild, Vic. What's the worst a Chinese spy could do?
To lean in, I would say, Hugh, on the liberal woke DEI tendencies of this country and to further drive that message. So it's the exact opposite what they would do in their country, which they think is laughable. And in fact, if you saw Miss Linda Sue's interviews, she talks about the importance of equity and trying to stress all these things while she was working for Governor Hochul and Governor Andrew Cuomo. That's the first thing. And the second thing was enforcing a China-like COVID shutdown. And so those are the two areas that I think.
You're at 50,000 feet. I read too many spy novels, and I served in the intel business when I was at Justice. You take malware on a thumb drive, and you take it and you find the air-gapped computer systems for the grid and the first responders and police and coordinate, and you violate the air gap on all of the isolated computer hardware systems of New York State. That's what I immediately thought of, because when last time I had access to anything remotely classified was 1989. Right? So I had every classification in 89. And the bad guys in 89 did stuff like that, right? That's the whole deal, was to try and find out what was going on. So you assume the governor of New York is in touch with various National Guard units in the military. How does this story not get coverage?
Well, I think it might have to do with the party affiliation of the governor. So there was a very good feature story in the Wall Street Journal over the weekend about this case. But outside of that, Hugh, you're absolutely right. It would be a national scandal, and people would be on it, particularly if it's a governor that was beloved by the right, somebody they were going after. Could you imagine if there was a Chinese spy working for Governor Ron DeSantis in Florida, for example, what that would be like? The coverage would be endless. It would be endless.
So how do you feel? We have big debate tomorrow night. I got to stay up late. I got guests top to bottom on Wednesday to give me their hot takes, and I try and be fair. But my expectation is that Kamala Harris will be fine. She can do 90 seconds, unlike Joe Biden. What's your expectation?
I think what the problem is, our expectations are so low, and so when you define that she'll be fine, it is Joe Biden level that she's not going to say I beat Medicare to death or I whatever, and so she's not going to say that. But anything based on that Dana Bash interview, she's going to be very much in need of those notes. She's going to be in need of an assist from the interviewers like David Muir. The best thing for Donald Trump to do is what he said he was planning on doing, which is not interrupting her at all and letting her do all the talking. That would be great. It works against him that there's not going to be the open mic situation. As you know, she wanted to not only interrupt Donald Trump not only to be interrupted by Donald Trump so she could say, I'm speaking, but also to interrupt her because she's such a great prosecutor. So she wanted it both ways. And apparently,
what's your over-under on the word convicted or felon? Combine them two. What's your mine is 20?
Yeah. Oh, I was going to say 40.
Okay, well, you'll take the over on my 20. Last question.
Yeah, take the over.
I have no opinion of David Muir. I've never watched ABC News. I wouldn't recognize David Muir. I know he has 7 million viewers a night. To me, the stakes are highest for him and his partner, Lindsay, because people will decide whether they give ABC News a chance. Do you have an opinion on David Muir? I have no opinion, good or bad. None.
No. I don't either, because I think the last time I watched ABC News regularly was with Peter Jennings. So, but you're right. I think it's going to be make or break. He has to, if he knows what's best for him, he's going to ask tough questions. But of course, that's going to infuriate the other side. Dana Bash just got heckled horribly at Politics and Prose by
Pennsylvania,
and
Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, Erie and Bedford and Scranton and Wilkes-Barre. I'm everywhere in the Keystone State. That's why Selena Zito is always useful. She's my Yinzer report. And everybody in Pennsylvania is happy because both the Eagles and the Steelers won. So you saw the polls over the weekend. Do you believe it's tied in Pennsylvania, Selena?
I've been saying that since during the middle of her convention, that there wasn't this great surge in enthusiasm. There was among Democrats who were unhappy about Biden, but there wasn't anything moving or changing. It was very much the same place where it was between Trump and Biden. She did not change this event, this election.
So yesterday, Raphael Warnock, her surrogate on Meet the Press, gets asked about Kamala Harris' mandatory buyback of guns program from 2019. And he doesn't say, oh, no, she's not for that anymore. So I guess she is. How's that fly in Pennsylvania? We're going to make you give in your guns.
Yeah, probably not. I mean, this is the challenge, right? People do these great big, like the Labor Day event that happened in Pittsburgh. And it came across as though labor was behind her, right? En masse, right? All labor. That's not true. Labor leadership may be, but that event had people that were invite only from, the labor unions. Most of them, or a lot of them, were labor leaders. There were some rank and file there. But rank and file laborers in Pennsylvania, union members, are almost always gun owners. And not only does it have to do with hunting, but it also has to do with self-protection. That does not fly with that voter at all. And so, no, that was the long answer to your question. No, big gun control in the form that Warnock was talking about Harris's position is not popular at all among labor or a lot of Pennsylvanians.
So for new listeners, whether they're in Key West or any of my other news stations, Selena wrote a book 8 years ago that called The Great Revolt. And she was the only one who called Trump winning. In Pennsylvania, and Selena lives in Pittsburgh, and she's a dear friend. She is a Pittsburgher, so we call it the Yinzer Report. But you've got to listen now when she explains to you why, as Erie goes, so goes the country. Now, I'm on in Wilkes-Barre and Scranton and Bedford and Philly and Pittsburgh, but I'm really talking to Talk Erie right now, which is 103.3, 105.5, and 1530 AM up there in Erie. Why does Erie matter so much? Explain it to the folks in Atlanta driving to work.
So Erie was the home forever and a day of the New Deal coalition of Democrats. It voted for a Democrat president for generations. And that all changed in 2016 when the coalition started to change, where you saw the Republican Party start to embrace and bring on the blue-collar voter who either was a Democrat or an independent or middle-of-the-road Republican. And in 2016, Trump, I remember being up there in 2016 and coming home and writing and saying, he's going to win Erie. And people had thought that I'd lost my mind. No Republican ever won Erie. But he did. He narrowly lost it in 2020 to Joe Biden. Biden was able to pick off those working class voters. But you go up to Erie right now, and it feels, and the reporting is very similar to what I was experiencing in 2016. And I think that
And as Erie goes, I want to tell people, Selena and I grew up, we're about the same age, and we grew up about 50 miles apart. So I'm from Trumbull County, which is adjacent to Mahoning County, which always voted blue and flipped red in 2016, ain't going back. And I could drive 7 miles and be in Erie, Pennsylvania, Erie County, Pennsylvania. So Selena, if you had to bet your house, who would you bet Pennsylvania goes to in November?
If the elections were held today, it's definitely Trump, without a question in my mind. It has nothing to do with liking him or not liking him. It has everything to do with what I'm seeing on the ground.
And when you look around Pittsburgh, is the enthusiasm that allegedly Kamala Harris generated anywhere evident?
No. But as I was driving I now don't live in the city of Pittsburgh. I live in Westmoreland County. Every Sunday dinner at my parents' house. I drive through the city to get to my parents' house. And even, you expect to see it in the rural and suburban areas. You see the Trump enthusiasm. But even in the city of Pittsburgh, I'm seeing all of these Trump signs in places and neighborhoods they should not be. And that tells me something. The coalition is expanding that I wrote about in The Great Revolt as opposed to shrinking.
I am reviewing with everyone at the beginning of this 57-day sprint to the presidency that some states are more important than others. Georgia matters a lot. And I'm glad that I have the highest rated show in Atlanta on WGAN 920 AM The Answer. I am glad that I'm on News Talk 98.5 in Portland and in Manchester on WFEA 1370 AM 99.9 because New Hampshire matters. The Portland station covers northern New Hampshire. Manchester WFEA covers southern New Hampshire. I'm off on in Keene, WKBK 94.1. Kamala Harris was in New Hampshire last week for a reason. I am all over Pennsylvania, 94.3 The Talker in Scranton and Wilkes-Barre. Talk Erie, 103.3, 105.5, 1530 AM. You just heard Selena Zito say, as Erie goes, so goes the entire state. But I'm also on in Philadelphia, talking to the collar suburbs, 990 AM, WNTP. In Pittsburgh, AM 1250, The Answer, WDK. And you look at Detroit, I'm on the Patriot there on 1400 AM and 101.5. In Las Vegas, AM 670. In Reno, KFOY 1060. Phoenix, KKNT 960. I've been on there for 20 plus years. Ditto the Patriot. The Voice in Tucson, KVOA, KQNA, and in Flagstaff and Prescott and all over the state, 1130 AM, 99.9, 99.5. Why do I stress these states? Because there aren't 7 swing states. North Carolina's in the bag for Trump. It just is. Georgia, they got to win it back. And thank God Brian Kemp and Donald Trump are working with each other this time. Pennsylvania's everything. Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, Nevada. That's it. Everybody else is in the bag, right? Ohio, Iowa, they're red. North Carolina is red. Florida is red. Texas is red. We do look at blue California, and we look at blue New York, and that's their advantage. They are being Democrats. I'm a Republican. If you're new to the show, I'm open about this. And the big states tomorrow night are, can Kamala Harris make a coherent statement? I don't know. Now I turn to Akash Chougule. He's with the vice president of our sponsor, Americans for Prosperity. I urge everyone to go to americansforprosperity.org.com in all of those states. I can't remember. Is it .org or .com, Akash?
We are .org. You are a 501c4 policy advocacy organization.
All right. americansforprosperity.org. Akash, I got to play for you 2 clips from this weekend because they're economic clips, and they're astonishing to me. This is a Trump ad hitting Kamala Harris on affordability. I'm going to ask you to fact check it for me. Cut number 29.
We should be doing everything we can to make it more affordable to buy a home. A just released housing index reveals just how rough the market is, especially for first-time home buyers. It showed home prices for the nation's top 20 metro areas rose 5.4% from June of last year to June of this year, a record jump for that month.
The average home buyer needs to make over $110,000 to afford the average home. Home buyers only needed to make $76,000 back in 2020.
Mortgage rates are now at their highest level in 21 years.
86% of U.S. renters would like to buy, but they can't. That really speaks to a lot of pessimism here about the American dream, how it feels like it's out of reach. Home ownership remains the ticket to wealth generation. So this is just widening the gap between the haves and the have-nots.
She stands there and says on day one, she's going to tackle the housing affordability crisis in our country.
But day one for Kamala was 3.5 years ago.
What the hell have you been doing for all that time?
Then it types Kamala Harris is weak, failed. Kamala Harris is a dangerous liberal. Akash, what do you make of that ad?
I love this ad, Hugh. I love that they're going on offense on this. Look, I don't expect the president to remember every single number that showed up in that ad and the percentages and the polls, but the fact of the matter is that that CNN clip was right. Home ownership is the ticket to the American dream, and it's gotten more expensive because the things that it takes to buy a home have gotten more expensive over the last 4 years. Labor costs are up. Material costs are up. Interest rates are up. All of those things are making homes more expensive, which is why the average age of a first-time home buyer right now, Hugh, is 49 years old.
Holy
the
smokes.
American dream for recent college graduates to buy a home is non-existent.
Okay, Kosh, the second clip I want to play for you is Bernie Sanders, who is doing the surrogate for Kamala Harris bit on Meet the Press yesterday. And Kristen Welker asked him a very simple question, cut number 33.
No, I don't think she's abandoning her ideals. I think she's trying to be pragmatic and doing what she thinks is right in order to win the election.
Okay, Akash, what are Kamala Harris's ideals? Born and raised in Berkeley and Montreal, educated at Howard in D.C., part of the Bay Area radical machine. What do you think? What are her values?
I mean, Hugh, we know this. Like you said, she's a down-the-line San Francisco progressive. But here's the thing. She's not being pragmatic. She's hiding her values and her true beliefs. And the mainstream press is giving her a pass on it. I mean, just imagine Vice President Pence trying to do this, trying to paper over positions that he took on camera 4 years ago, trying to distance himself from the administration that he was currently a part of while he was running for president, and the media giving him a pass on it. It would absolutely never happen. We know what her values are. They're whatever the progressive wing of the Democratic Party says they are, and whatever she thinks is necessary for her to get elected. I think, again, this is something the president needs to call her out on, because the American people deserve to know how disingenuous she is.
Again, I'm talking with Akash Chogali, who is the Vice President of AmericansForProsperity.org. If you go to AmericansForProsperity.org, you can get in the game. You get involved. There are 6 key swing states, Akash. Some people say 7, but I don't think North Carolina is actually going to vote for Kamala Harris. I believe Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, and Nevada. And I ran down all my affiliates on there, but let's talk specifically to Pennsylvania right now, because Bob Casey is their senator. He was on CNN this weekend with Manu Raju and said this, cut number 31.
Would you consider yourself a Biden-Harris Democrat?
Oh, I don't put a label on it.
What issues do you break from her on?
Oh, I'm not going to try to itemize issues that we might not have total agreement on.
What do you make of that? And are you in Pennsylvania to point out to people that it's not just a Kamala Harris problem, it's a Bob Casey problem?
Oh, yeah. We will be knocking on millions and millions of doors, making millions and millions of phone calls, sending mail in Pennsylvania, running ads to expose exactly that. Bob Casey can't decide whether or not he's a Biden-Harris Democrat, but his voting record says that he absolutely is. Those massive spending bills that caused inflation, Hugh, they needed every single Democratic senator vote in the Senate, and they got them. And that includes Bob Casey. And that's why we saw interest rates at 9% and prices up 20% since President Biden took office. It's because of the votes that Bob Casey passed or took for the Biden-Harris agenda.
Now, Akash, I have a column in tomorrow's Fox News talking about the questions that I would ask. I have no opinion of David Muir. I've never met him. I don't know Lindsay. I have no opinion. I haven't watched ABC News since Peter Jennings died. So they have a big opportunity to actually persuade people they're as reliable as, say, Brett Baer, who I have no idea how he votes. What do you think they're going to ask? What do you want them to ask?
I mean, what I expect them to ask about, Hugh, as you know, is going to be January 6th. It's going to be social issues. It's going to be things that are not near the top of the list of most important issues to the American people. What they should be asking about is the economy, is inflation, is the cost of living crisis, is the border crisis. I mean, these are real issues the American people have said are their biggest concerns, but I don't expect there to be a significant amount of debate on them because, frankly, I think the mainstream press realizes these are losers for the Biden-Harris agenda and for Democrats up and down the ballot. But ultimately, it's what the American people want to know. And so I think, as I have told you before, Hugh, it's going to be incumbent on Trump and Republicans to press this case and ask these questions and make the points that the press won't make on the Democratic agenda.
You know, Cut, I have a little bit of hope that David Muir wants to add viewers, not subtract viewers. I have a little bit of hope that it's going to be fair. But now I want to close. I'll do a market report in the next segment. The Dow was off 410 points on Friday. They had the worst week of the year. What was going on with the markets last week? What were they reacting to?
I think just continued uncertainty, Hugh. I mean, again, you can't really read much into any one report here or there. And I say the same thing about jobs reports and things like that. No one report is going to give you an accurate snapshot of where things are at. But what does give you an accurate assessment of where things are at are the indicators over time. And I think the single biggest economic indicator that the government is giving us over time are interest rates. It's the cost of living. And the fact of the matter is that prices are up 20% since President Biden took office, and you're going to continue to have uncertainty in the market until there is policy certainty coming from government. That includes interest rates, taxes, regulations, and so on. I think that's something.
I don't know if Nick Grovich is on his way to the office, although Nick is the kind of guy who gets up before the dawn, just like I do. He is the owner of AmericanFederal.com. It's been in operation for 40 years plus. Nick Grovich sponsors our market report every day. And if you're going to buy or sell gold today, you do it with Nick and his team because that's what they do. They also do collectibles and numismatics if you're one of those people. But if you're just seeking to diversify your portfolio by just buying gold and putting it in your safety deposit box, you can open an IRA with Nick. They'll walk you through that too, a gold IRA. But if you just want to buy Krugerrands or American Eagles or Canadian Maple Leafs and you want to get on a regular plan to do it every year or every time it hits a certain price mark or a certain amount every month, you do it with Nick and his team. You call them at 1-800-221-7694. 1-800-221-7694. Gold this morning at $2,525 an ounce. $2,525 an ounce. Now, I don't know what your price is going to be when you call up Nick, because you got to get cash in his hand, and then it's the strike price minus the commission if you're buying gold or selling gold. And the strike price is where is the market today? And sometimes the market moves in gold a lot, usually up over the last 2 years. And Nick is dealing with that and helping people buy more gold, I think, than he's ever done before, as people sell gold to try and deal with the Biden-Harris economy. But you can call them at 1-800-221-7694. Leave a message if they're not at the office yet. They will call you back. Now, let me review what happened. It was a bloody day on Wall Street on Friday. The Dow was off 410 points. The S&P was down 95 points. The NASDAQ fell 436 points, which is 2.5%. I mean, it was a bloodbath. Why? Because the jobs report came out and the economy is slipping into recession. It just is. You can't get a job. You can't buy a house. You can't afford to go to the supermarket. If you go to have just hamburgers, fries, and milkshakes, it's going to shock you how much it costs. And the reality is that's just the way it is. And it's going to be that way until Donald Trump gets in the office and has the only way to bring down prices, really, is to overproduce American domestic energy so that we flood the world market and bring down the cost of energy worldwide. It's one worldwide market. The price of oil, you know, is below $70 a barrel on West Texas, I believe, today. Or maybe it's Brent crude. I'm not sure. But it got to be driven down to $40 a barrel. And then the cost of food will decline at the grocery store. Why? Because it will take less money to produce the food. and less money to transport the food. It's just so simple. More energy means lower energy costs, means lower food costs everywhere. It also means lower everything costs. That's the Trump agenda. Drill, baby, drill. And I hope it's also fire up those nuclear plants. I read a story on North Dakota going after the AI industry because they can build the mega data centers. They're going to need the modular nukes. And I'll have to get Doug Burgum on to talk about that. But remember, in the meantime, diversify, diversify, diversify. I do not give economic advice. I don't tell you to buy gold or sell gold. I'm just telling you diversification has worked for most people for most years. And over the past 100 years, gold more than kept pace with inflation. And boy, it had in the last 3 years. And that's why gold is at $2,525 an ounce this morning, and why you should call Doug at 1-800-221-7694. Want to remind everyone I'm going out on the Battleground Tour in October. I think I'm going to do 3 stops, Detroit, Columbus, and Pittsburgh. Columbus, I just want to have Bernie Moreno in the Senate. Time to retire Sherrod Brown. And, of course, God save the country. It's up to the Steelers fans. It really is. And I'm appealing to you. You guys won yesterday. Good on you. The Browns are terrible, but that was week 1. I'm not going to worry. I'm not going to panic yet. They were really bad. My voice betrays it because I said, what? Ouch. Oh, I was yelling at the TV last night. Just want to ask you about 25 Truth, which is Kevin Roberts and I talked about 25truth.com. It's where people go to find out the truth about Project 2025. You're a senior fellow at Heritage. What do you make of the attempt of the Harris campaign to make Donald Trump own every recommendation of Project 2025, which just isn't true?
That's not true at all. In fact, the president and the campaign have disowned Project 2025. Now, Project 2025 is a very extensive document. I'd have to say it probably went too far and it probably came out too soon. But it's got a lot of alternative policy recommendations that somebody coming into office as president should seriously consider. And that doesn't mean that it gives guidance to President Trump that he's already, stated he's going to accept or that he's going to follow. But it sets forth a bunch of alternatives. Now, the left has cherry-picked that document and made things up that simply aren't in the document in an attempt to attack it. I think they think that anytime they say Project 2025, it somehow helps Harris's campaign, which of course has come forward with no real policy initiatives, none least that she can defend. She can't even do an interview without her vice president sitting right next to her. So I think they've overdone it. When the election's over, I think this will pass. There are good recommendations in there. There are some recommendations that the administration won't take. There are some that they may take. Who knows? We'll have to wait and see.
No, Andy, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on this morning especially is that both you and I spent a lot of our life in California. I have left. I think you left too, but I'm not sure.
Yeah.
And I don't think people understand what it means to be a San Francisco Democrat, as opposed to a L.A. Democrat, certainly an Orange County Democrat, much less the Inland Empire, which is red, red, red. Can you explain to them how radical San Francisco is?
Well, all I do is look at the policies they've enacted in San Francisco. I don't think you could find more liberal policies in Venezuela. As a matter of fact, they've gotten so bad that on crime in particular and homelessness, even the ultra lefties who run San Francisco have had to retrench a little bit. Gavin Newsom came out of San Francisco. The state of California, by the way, I did leave. I moved to Nashville, Tennessee in 2016 at Art Laffer's suggestion. So since
Good
2016,
choice.
we have been living in a free state.
Yep. I moved to Virginia in 2016, governed by the great Glenn Youngkin. So I'm living in a free state, or one that's moving that way. So, by the way, how do you like Tennessee for a California boy?
Love Tennessee. We spend the summers up in northern Michigan because it's a little hot there for somebody who lived in California for 25 years. But we're there most of the year and couldn't be happier.
That's why you're talking to me in Maine, because it's not cooled off enough in Virginia for me to go back there.
Right.
And I don't know if you know
California, Michigan.
Oh, okay. What does it look like in Michigan right now for Trump? I think he's going to win Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. Michigan, I'm not sure about.
Yeah, if you drive around, I'm in Leelanau County, which is one of the swing counties in the state, a county that'll be important. And boy, you see 10 Trump signs for every one Harris sign you see. And maybe the Harris people aren't getting their signs out, but back in 2020, I got very nervous driving around Leelanau County because there were a lot of Biden signs. I'm not seeing that this time around. I didn't see any Biden signs, and I'm seeing very few Harris signs. A lot of Trump signs, a lot of Trump flags, a lot of enthusiasm for the president up here. Detroit is going to be a problem, but it's always a problem for Republicans. I'm hoping people that are listening to your show from Detroit will take many of the things you say to heart, because it would be wonderful if we could carry Michigan again.
We are on right now in Detroit on the Patriot 101.5 FM, 1400 AM. And so please listen. Now, Andy, you know the president pretty well, and you know how he debates. I don't know David Muir. I've never worked with him. I've never seen his newscast. I don't know Lindsay. The only thing I know about ABC is George running This Week on Sunday morning, and it's left of left. But I don't know David Muir. Do you have any opinion on how tomorrow night's going to go, and do you trust ABC to be fair?
Well, no, I don't trust ABC to be fair. They haven't been fair for years. They've been very left leaning and have pursued the leftist agenda, the Biden agenda, the Obama agenda to the extent that they could. So I think it would be remarkable if they were fair. But I think President Trump can handle Harris, and I think he can handle the opposition that he'll get from ABC News. Look, she didn't agree to this ABC News interview or debate because she thought they were going to be tough on her. She agreed to it because she thought they'd be easy on her. If she was willing to face some tough questioning, she would have agreed to other debates beyond ABC News. She hasn't done that. She won't do that because she's not very good on her feet. She's not going to be able to defend her policies. I don't want to, by the way, I don't want to underplay her. We shouldn't. We have to remember she was a prosecutor. Look, she didn't pass the bar the first time, but she did pass the bar. She's been in debates before. This is not somebody that we should underestimate. You never underestimate your opposition. But I think it'll be the president against ABC News and Kamala Harris, as we've seen in prior years.
She's not going to be President Biden because she hasn't collapsed into incapacity. So she'll do better than Biden did. And I suppose that will be enough for the left wing to declare. But she's still stuck with the Bidenomics. I mean, I've got a clip. Let me play for you. This is Kamala Harris in August of last year, cut number 1.
All that, ladies and gentlemen, and everyone else, that is called Bidenomics. That is called Bidenomics, and we are very proud of Bidenomics.
And just a couple of years earlier, again, as vice president, this is in November of 2021, Kamala Harris, cut number 4.
What else are you going to do to fix this problem with inflation?
All right, thank you. Well, let's start with this. Prices have gone up, and families and individuals are dealing with the realities of that bread costs more, that gas costs more. And we have to understand what that means. That's about the cost of living going up. That's about having to stress and stretch limited resources. That's about a source of stress for families that is not only economic, but is on a daily level, something that is a heavy weight to carry. So it is something that we take very seriously. Very seriously. And we know from the history of this issue in the United States that when you see these prices go up, it has a direct impact on the quality of life for all people in our country. So it's a big issue, and we take it seriously. And it is a priority, therefore.
Andy, you were in the private sector for so long as a very successful CEO. When you hear something that inane, what do you think?
Well, I certainly don't think that's the person I want to vote for, somebody who's qualified to be president of the United States. I mean, this is one of those, inflation is a problem because prices go up. Russia's a big country. I love electric school buses. I mean, she says things that are inane and she just repeats the obvious, and then she laughs. Or, the tell with Joe Biden, when Joe Biden kind of lost his train of thought, when he didn't know where he was going or what he was talking about, he'd go anyway and go on to another subject. She laughs, and she has a laugh that's loud and kind of cackly, and I think she hopes that people will join in because I think she's either lost her train of thought or doesn't know what to say next. Look, inflation was caused by government infusing trillions of dollars into the economy. at a time when our supply chain couldn't meet the demand that was already existing. And the two bills that were the primary drivers of those monies going into the economy were the American Rescue Plan and the ridiculously named Inflation Reduction Act. It should have been called the Inflation Reactivation Act. In any event, in both of those bills, the ones that infused these trillions of dollars, she was the tie-breaking vote in Congress. She owns those bills. She owns inflation. There's no price fixing is a ridiculous option. It's never worked. It never will work. And there was no price gouging problem to begin with, because if you look at the inflation under the PPI, the Producer Price Index, which is what retailers like grocery stores, for example, or restaurants pay for goods, and you look at inflation that was passed on to consumers through the Consumer Price Index, they're both up about 20.4% since the beginning of the Biden-Harris administration. In fact, until about last year, the Producer Price Index, what those retailers pay, was way above what consumers were paying. They were actually shielding consumers from these price increases. It's only been in the last year that that's leveled out. So she's trying to come up with solutions to solve problems that don't exist, because she can't address the problem that does exist, which is that her and President Biden's policies caused this horrific inflation, which has gone to the extent of making a fast food meal a luxury. People are shocked at the grocery store and the gas station. They can't cover a $400 expense from their savings. Credit cards are up. 401ks are getting drained. Credit cards are being abused. It's bad out there. The less money you have, the worse the economy is right now. If you're wealthy, you're probably okay. If you're working class or middle class, you're suffering from this inflation. You're suffering from these Biden-Harris policies.
Andy, I have one last question. In a great economic club speech last week, President Trump introduced the idea of a sovereign wealth fund. If you were running it, I'd be in favor of that, because it would invest in startups and it would help close the deficit. But generally speaking, what do you think about it if government bureaucrats are running a sovereign wealth fund?
Well, it would worry me if government bureaucrats were running it. We need to do some different things to try and get the debt down and reduce the deficit. Our deficit this year will be about $2 trillion. That's just to put a little perspective. Everybody says that, and it passes over your lips very quickly, but that's about $5.5 billion a day that we're spending that we don't have, and we'll spend we're spending about $3 billion a day just on interest on the debt. So we need some creative ideas. This is a creative idea. We don't want to let it turn into something where bureaucrats are using it to run private sector companies, but it's an innovative idea.
Politico's gone off the rails to the left, but there remains some good bylines over there. One of them belongs to my guest, Olivia Beavers. She is not of the left. As far as I know, I have no idea where she is. She's a little bit like Brett Baer in this regard. Olivia, good morning. Welcome. What did former President Trump tell the House Republicans?
So Donald Trump was not on the phone call, but there were his top campaign advisors who were laying out their strategy to win the presidency. And they briefly touched on the upcoming debate. So Chris LaCivita, a top senior advisor, was basically saying, we don't expect there to be basically this entire flop like we saw with Joe Biden with Kamala Harris on stage, but everything she says will be an opportunity for us to message and define her. And I think you were just talking about it earlier on your show. I imagine extreme, radical are words that we're going to be seeing thrown back and forth between the two. But Donald Trump, I'm sure, is going to try to paint her as, too liberal for the country and point to some of her policies that she's changed throughout the years, especially when she was in California state politics.
Now, Olivia, I lived in California from 1978 to 80, and then I lived in California for a long time, from 1989 until 2016. So all told, about 30 years of California. And San Francisco isn't liberal. San Francisco is a radically progressive place. Their delegation is, of course, helmed by Nancy Pelosi, but who else is up there that would help sort of assist me in describing to non-California just how crazy San Francisco is? Because it is off the map, left wing. I mean, if you did a story on voting records, I think you'd find the San Francisco delegation the equal of anyone on the left end of the spectrum.
They're definitely progressive. And I think like another name that some of your listeners would know is Eric Swalwell, who is also, very closely sort of aligned, or Adam Schiff. They both come from California. They both have close relationships.
Adams, LA, though. Adams, LA. He used to be normal.
Yes,
Then the House Intel Committee drove him nuts. Yeah.
but I would say like sort of the same delegation and sort of atmosphere, even if they're not coming from San Francisco. But it is definitely a very progressive place, and you can tell that when I visited my brother there some years ago. He's no longer there, but so there's also some things happening in the House, and there was one that I wanted to talk to you about because I thought you'd be pretty interested in it.
Please.
Uh,
Please.
Well, so we have this week is going to be a lot about spending, the CR, but there's also China Week. And I was chasing a story last week where there is this bipartisan legislation to prevent Chinese biotech companies from basically restrict them from being able to do business in the US. And it passed out of committee 40-1. But you're hitting some issue with a influential Democratic congressman, because one of those companies that they actually name in the legislation was going to be opening up a location in this congressman's district, Congressman McGovern in Massachusetts. And so he's now trying to convince Democrats.
Oh, don't tell me. Jim is an old friend of mine. I've known Jim forever. We're not like go out to dinner friends, but I've known him forever. I can't believe he's defending the CCP. Is he really defending a Chinese company?
He is defending, what is it? It's called Wuxi Biologics. And he's arguing that he doesn't agree or understand the process for which companies were included in the legislation. The people who backed the bill argue that there have been some clear ties between these companies. I think there's only 4 that are named, and the CCP. So you're kind of hitting this weird kind of moment of, Krishnamurthy, a top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, was one of the Democratic co-sponsors. So it definitely has Democratic support.
Olivia, would you've got editors, but would you do me the favor of going to Al Murthy, what he thinks about a Chinese spy working for 2 New York governors and the amount of damage they could have done? I keep thinking about them taking air gap computer systems on state security systems, National Guard things, and then just doing a thumb drive in them with malware. It is astonishing to me that this story has not gotten more ink. Have you heard it talked about in Congress, that there was a Chinese spy in the Cuomo and Hochul administration, senior spy?
I saw it definitely becoming a story over recess, but this would be like the first time that we can ask members of Congress about what they think that sort of consequence would be. And it would be good to ask House Intel what kind of information they think could have been passed along to the Chinese government, and what that might mean for our
not only
more broad.
I used to be at Justice doing the FISA stuff, and it's not about passing along, it's about inserting malware. It's the worst thing they can do to us, and I just think they know everything that there is to know about whatever New York governors had access to, and we have not fully, we haven't even begun to figure out how bad that spy breach was. Good morning, John. How are you?
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
I am glad to have you here because you put out a polls in one place this weekend. And whenever you put out a polls in one place, I want to direct people to political news, political items over at Substack. Tell people what you do when you do a polls in one place.
Well, the idea is that there are, hundreds of polls every week, and what we try to do is find the 10 or 12 polls that we think are the most interesting or important, or both. And that's sort of the framework of polls in one place. And what's interesting about doing polls in one place this time is that in the U.S. presidential election, the polls are the same every week. So you don't really need to update them, because Michigan is close, Wisconsin is close, Pennsylvania is close, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Now, John, you're a serious guy you were on the decision desk for years. You know how polling can be right or wrong. I am not. I don't know statistics. I never took them. I just take them at face value. But I do wonder whether or not something Pew Research wrote about, polling response bias, is a real deal for you, because polling response bias, according to Pew, indicates that some segments of the population are in a hurry to talk to pollsters and other segments of the population are not. Do you believe in polling response bias?
I think I do, actually. I think that there's, I thought in 2020 there was a hidden Trump vote. And, the question is whether the pollsters have corrected this problem for 2024. I don't know the answer to that. But I will say this, it is increasingly hard to conduct public opinion surveys. The refusal rate is in the 90th percentile. If you're doing a poll in Iowa, I remember talking to Ann Seltzer, who does the Iowa poll for the Des Moines Register. She does also a lot of national polling. And she was saying that her refusal rates were in the 90s, 90 percentile. Not only is there a problem getting it right, there's a problem getting people to actually respond.
Now, John, I hate to bring this up because I work for the Washington Post, so I hate to bring this up, but I like to do so because it illustrates better than anything else. A week before the 2020 election, less than 7 days actually, ABC Washington Post ran a poll that said Joe Biden was 17 points ahead of Donald Trump. In fact, the final count, Joe Biden won Wisconsin by 0.63 point, not 17 points, 0.63 point. I think that was, in effect, voter suppression. I don't think they intended to do it, but how does someone get it that wrong? You were in this business for a long time.
I think if you see a poll, we had in 1988, I was at the NBC News election unit, and with 3 or 4 weeks to go, then Vice President George H.W. Bush was ahead of Mike Dukakis, according to our poll that we've been in the field with, by 17 points. And we had a meeting about it, and we decided to not publish it, not put it on the air, because it just was so out of whack with reality. A 95% confidence level can mean that 1 out of every 20 polls is completely wrong. And if you had in Wisconsin a 17-point lead in 2020, at the very end of the campaign, it was obviously wrong and should have thrown it out.
And so, do you expect more discipline or less discipline among pollsters this year? I got asked at a dinner party on Saturday night with my main buddies. We're all around the table. We were celebrating Dr. Denise's wedding. And I got asked, how do they do this? And I said, I have no idea how they do it now. I assume that they are now sending emails to people, because you don't want self-selection. That screws up a poll. I don't care what an internet poll says. And if it's a 90% don't answer the phone rate, just actually, what do they do? I'm sympathetic to it.
Yeah, it's landline, mobile, and internet. And the best actually just, don't do the screening. They do the interviews, they then get the demographics, and then they match the demographics to the Census Bureau data from the state or from the country. But it's inexact. One of the things that's interesting about the polls this time is that they all agree, which is, usually not the case. But every single poll at the national level, every single poll at the so-called battleground state level is within the margin of error.
And that's what I want people to understand. It's a coin toss, and we don't know. Now, John, I'd like to move over to news items this morning. Every single day, people who follow me on X see one item from news items. They're usually between 12 and 15. John and his team, I don't know what time you get up, John. I get up at 4:45 latest, sometimes 4:30 in the morning to get ready. I don't know how early up you guys are up, but I'm getting drafts of news items early. And today you wrote about Leonard Leo. Now, I don't know Leonard. I've texted with him once. I'm not a member of the Federalist Society. I'm a member of no organized organization that has anything to do with politics for reasons having to do with the news business. But today you have a news item story that Leonard is going to spend, quote, $1 billion to crush liberal dominance across corporate America news. Can he? That's not enough money, is it?
I don't know. The thing that made it newsworthy, and the reason I put it in news items today is I think that was the first interview that Mr. Leo has given in years, and he gave it to the Financial Times, which was equally interesting. But how much and how he proposes to do that, I don't really understand. I presume that he would choose 6 or 8 companies and go after them, but I don't know how that would work.
$1 billion is not enough. And it's the dark money numbers impossible. I keep looking for news items, but I don't think we'll know until after the FEC gets its quarterly report in after the election. John, would you explain what news items is, where it came from? You've got the best subscriber list in the business. I mean, really the best people read news items. What is it? How do people find it?
Well, you go to the easiest way to find both newsletters is to go to news-items.com. And News Items was born out of, actually, I was at News Corp at the time, and it was, in its first iteration, it was a newsletter for Fox News and News Corp executives and editors. Then it was the Wall Street Journal CEO Council's morning brief. And then I left News Corp and Fox and started it as an independent Substack newsletter. The basic idea is we cover 4 subject areas: world in disarray, advances in science and technology, financialization of everything, and politics, domestic and global. And we, generally speaking, not always, have 3 or 4 items from each category that we think are the most interesting or important that particular day, and out it goes. The day starts, Joanna and Mary and Tom have all filed by 1 o'clock, and I start work on it at 1:30.
Yeah, that is so amazing. Now, John, I want to close this way. My older brother is PhD. He's Mycroft, as in Sherlock's older brother, only my other older brother is Sherlock. I'm just the dummy in the family, and I don't do science. So I read your news items for science. I think on Friday you announced that someone has figured out COVID, or at least an antibody that works on COVID. Would you just alert people to that? I put it up on the air, but I'm on the X feed, but I want people to know we had a big breakthrough on COVID.
Yeah, the University of Texas basically came up with a vaccine that addresses, if you will, all of the various iterations of COVID, or so they claim. And if you're interested in reading more about that, you simply go to the UTexas website, which is utexas.edu. But it's a major breakthrough, and given the encroachment of more, I'll leave it at that.
I began today's show, and I'm going to put it in here in hour 3. I am focused on the swing states. And that means I've got almost 500 affiliates, and I'm on the Salem News Channel, and the reach of this show is massive. And so when I zero in, I'm not ignoring my hometown of Warren, Youngstown. I love you. I know you're going to be a red state, so I'm just not following what the polls are in your state. All right, Ohio's going to go for Trump. It's going to elect Bernie Moreno. I'm not interested. I'd love to have Senator Cruz on, even though Texas is going to vote for Donald Trump. I want Senator Cruz to win going away. I'll have Senator Scott on. Ditto. Florida's going to be red. Not going to talk to people from California, not bothering with newsmakers in New York. I am focused on what I think are the 6 swing states. Some people say 7. I just don't think North Carolina is really close. But that means I pay particularly attention to News Talk 98.5 WGAN. That's the FM affiliate in Portland, Maine, along with its 560 AM signal. In Portland gets all of northern New Hampshire. It's New Hampshire is the swing state. Maine is not, although in the north of Maine, 2nd District might flip. Jared Golden might be out on his butt because the red part of Maine has gotten redder. Then I talked to my friends in Manchester on WFEA 1370 AM 99.9 in New Hampshire, and in Keene, New Hampshire, WKBK 94.1, 1290. And I do that because New Hampshire is a swing state. That's not, I think it's swingier than the swing states in North Carolina. I just think New Hampshire is swingier. I also talk, especially to Pennsylvania voters. I mean, 94.3, the talker in Scranton. Thank you, Vince Benedetto, for putting me on in Scranton and Wilkes-Barre on 94.3. I talk to Talk Erie, which is the 103.3, 105.9, 1530 AM, because as Erie goes, so goes the country. Of course, Salem has two sticks, 990 AM WNTP in Pittsburgh, AM 1250 The Answer in Philly. I talk to those folks. I talk to Bedford. I talk to everybody in between. Cover the Keystone State. I talk to the Patriot in Detroit. That's 101.5 FM and 1400 AM. I talk to Las Vegas. All right. It's in the middle of the night in Las Vegas. AM 670. But people are up in the middle of the night. A lot of people are going home. I'm telling you, you got to vote for Trump, because Kamala Harris is going to take more of your money and kill the travel industry and kill the tourism industry, because we can't afford to go anywhere. I talked to Reno, KFOY 1060. Same deal, Reno. You got to vote for Trump. I talked to Phoenix, KKNT. I'm a legacy. I've been on there for 25 years. The Patriot, 960, AM 960, The Patriot. I've been on in Tucson on 1030 KQNA, or a sister station there, for 25 years. Flagstaff, Prescott in Arizona, 1130 AM, 99.9, 95.5 FM. I talk with a particular emphasis on the swing states because everything comes down. I would like Trump to win 350. I'm not counting on New York or California. I would like some surprises to show up. I would love for Virginia to flip. I'm on in the Metro Beltway, of course. I live in the Beltway. I'm a Virginia voter. It might flip. It might, because you can't afford to live there. I've got all three kids live in Virginia. Touching Mrs. Hewitt and I have all of our kids and grandkids live in Virginia. They all moved there out of California for a variety of reasons, nothing to do with us. And I moved back when Bill Bennett retired. But I'm here to tell you, I am focused on the swing state. That's why I'm telling you votes and polls from there more than anywhere else. Dan Senor is the host of the Call Me Back podcast. If you listen to me at all, you know that Dan's podcast is probably the most influential source for news on Israel's seven-front war for an American audience that there exists. And his latest episode is with Douglas Murray, who's the new Christopher Hitchens. And so I cannot wait for the show to be done today, because I'm going to go out and immediately do my 9 miles and listen to Dan talking to Douglas Murray. Just give us a little preview of that episode. Dan, welcome. Good morning. Thank you for joining me.
Hey, Douglas. Hey, Hugh. Good morning. Good to be with you. Look, I can't believe I'm saying this, but we are steps away, really days away, from the 1-year anniversary of October 7th. I just couldn't imagine when October 7th happened that we'd still be talking about the war a year from October 7th. I didn't expect there to still be hostages, Israeli hostages, American hostages in the dungeons of Gaza a year from that moment. And here we are. And I wouldn't have imagined that Israel would basically be in a multi-front war a year from October 7th. And like I said, here we are. So what I wanted to do is have a series of conversations with some of the voices that have influenced me the most since October 7th over the past year, the voices I've relied on, and have not the normal news of the day conversations. You know, what happened in southern Lebanon? What happened at Rafah? What happened? What's the latest debate on the Philadelphia corridor? I want to pull back from the day-to-day and have a bigger picture conversation with what I think are some of the most keen and most insightful thinkers and protagonists in the story since October 7th, and have them talk about the lessons they've learned, what it's taught them about Israel and Israel's struggle, what it's taught them about the Middle East, what it's taught them about the U.S., what they've learned about Western civilization, and the threats to Western civilization, and where all this is going. And so I'm releasing a series of these conversations, both on podcast and on video, and Douglas was the first one.
Well, I cannot wait to listen to that. I know you're doing live events as well, and I want you to tell people where they can come and hear those live events before I go to my question set.
Yeah, so on September 24th in New York City, I'm doing an event at the Stryker Center, which is at a synagogue in New York, Temple Emmanuel, with Amir Tibon, who's a journalist for Haaretz, who has an extraordinary story from October 7th. He was living in a kibbutz near the south in southern Israel with his wife and his two little kids. The kibbutz became overrun by Hamas. He was hiding in what they call in Hebrew the mamad, which is like their bomb shelter or safe room. And he contacted his father, who's a legendary Israeli army general, retired, and his father, who lives up in central Israel, basically drove down and ultimately saved his son and his grandchildren. It's an extraordinary story of what his father experienced along the way, what he experienced during that day, and then because he's a journalist, who I don't agree with all the time, by the way, on issues, but because he is an actual journalist, he's also been covering the war. So he not only was a victim of the war, he's been covering the war, and so we're having a live conversation on September 24th on the date of the release of his book, which is about his October 7th story and then what has followed. His October 7th story was featured on 60 Minutes. And then, and so we're going to do a live podcast at the Stryker Center. You can purchase tickets. You just go to the Stryker Center website and you'll search for events, Senor, Senor, or Tibon, Tibon. That's on September 24th. And actually tonight, I am in Philadelphia. I'm doing an event with Dave McCormick, who is a close personal friend and is also running for the U.S. Senate, as you know, and he's a combat veteran and a national security expert, and he went to Israel soon after October 7th. I helped him plan his trip. He and his wife, Dina Powell, went, I think, as early as January. So, before many Americans had been to Israel after October 7th, he was there, and he went down to southern Israel, to the Gaza envelope. He visited the kibbutzim. He met with families of hostages. He was right in there, shoulder to shoulder. He'd been to Israel earlier in his national security career, but never obviously as a civilian. Certainly not in that context. And so he and I are doing an event tonight at 8 p.m. in the Philadelphia area. And it's a event open to the public. We're talking about Israel, the U.S.-Israel relationship. And details for that event are I tweeted it out. Maybe I'll send it to you, and you can, if you want to post it.
I will. I'm a big fan of Dave McCormick. He's on this show often, weekly, and I hope Pennsylvania sends him to the Senate because we could use a veteran of the 82nd Airborne and the smarts that come from Wall Street. Dina, of course, a national security expert as well. Now, Dan, I want to begin. I have a bunch of questions. First question. Yeah. I believe there is something called a Fauda effect in America. That is, for every American who watched Fauda, and I am one who watched every minute of the Israeli series about their most secret covert operators, I'm surprised that they've only been able to rescue as few as they have. But I'm also surprised that Americans don't understand the risk of tunnels under the Philadelphia corridor, because when Netanyahu said last week, we don't want him going to Iran, that was season 4. Gabby, who's a character that Doron lost in Paris, the danger is he's going to end up in Iran and they'll do anything to stop him from getting to Iran. So would you explain to people why that resonates with Israelis and why Netanyahu is perhaps stressing that as a risk?
So if you look at Gaza, which has basically been turned into it's a piece of territory that's been basically turned into a war-fighting machine by Hamas over the last, call it, decade and a half. Israel left in 2005, and within a few years after that, the war-fighting machine that Israel, unfortunately, that was unfortunately unleashed on Israel on October 7th had been built over a number of years. And that includes many things. It includes, as you said, this labyrinth of underground tunnels. It's bigger in terms of miles than the London Underground. It's comparable in many ways to the New York City subway system in terms of its scale, hundreds of miles of 400 or 500 miles of tunnels underground. And that's where Hamas hides, plots, builds weapons, stores weapons. So there's that capability. Then they have have had, not as much anymore, extraordinary war chest, unbelievable weapons of all shapes and sizes and capabilities, and they have money. They have a lot of money, and they have the capacity to come and go from Gaza as they please. This is all possible because of what you just called the Philadelphia Corridor, which was a military term applied by the ADF years ago when they were deciding what to do with this area when they left Gaza in 2005, which is it's about a 14-kilometer corridor at the border between Gaza and Egypt, between Gaza and the Sinai. So this area, it turns out, there's been a lot of smuggling through the corridor from Egypt and Sinai through the Sinai into Gaza, and then there's also 180 tunnels that Israel has found. There may be more, by the way. Israel's only just recently found 180 tunnels underneath the Philadelphia corridor. Again, these secret tunnels. So this is how Hamas has been able to get the capabilities into Gaza that enabled them to build this tunnel system. They needed cement trucks and cement and engineering resources, and just imagine what it takes to build a subway system. So how did all that get into Gaza? Isn't that interesting? Well, a lot of it came in through the Philadelphia corridor. A, B, weapons. How does the transport of weapons actually happen? Well, it turns out that it was all coming through the Philadelphia corridor. So the first thing is, if you're fighting an enemy, if you're trying to win a war, you can't do that while having their main supply line, their main supply route open. You have to shut it down, right? You can't be fighting a guerrilla war, a guerrilla enemy, and a guerrilla warfighting enemy, and have them be able to just have this supply route completely open 24/7. That's the first thing. The second thing is, when you're fighting a guerrilla war enemy, you do not want them to be able to leave. You want to win the war. The way you win the war is you capture them or you kill them, but you don't let them scatter. And lastly, there are hostages. There are still over 100 hostages in Gaza. You do not want Hamas to have the capacity to take those hostages out of Gaza. God knows where they'll wind up. There's been speculation that Hamas may at some point try to get some of the hostages out and get them into Iran. So for all those reasons, the Philadelphia corridor is a key, not the key. I'm not suggesting that it's the only metric for success in Israel's war against Hamas, but the idea that Israel can fight this war without having some plan for what it's going to do with the Philadelphia corridor is completely delusional.
I am talking with Dan Senor. He is the host of the Call Me Back podcast, which you should listen, like, follow, and tell everyone about, because it is the best source of information. His array of guests span the Israeli political spectrum, as well as observers from the United States and from England, as with Douglas Murray today. Now, I want to ask, there are 350 plus Israeli soldiers who have been killed in Gaza since the beginning of the war. Doesn't count the 10/7 casualties. Do they have an organization similar to the two organizations representing hostage families, one which is Ceasefire Now and one which is Tikva, which is not ceasefire? The hostages cannot be made the number one objective. There are two. We had 500,000 Israelis in the streets on Saturday. I'm just wondering if the families of the fallen soldiers have a voice, Dan Senor.
That's a good question. They're not organized in terms of the fallen soldiers of the Gaza war. Obviously, there are organizations in Israel that represent fallen soldiers generally, but there's not one that's specific to the Gaza fighting. At least not that I know of. I think I know where you're going with this, and I'll say that this is part of the tension within the protest movement generally, and within the hostage families movement, the hostages forum, they call it, in Israel. And obviously there's and let me just preface this by saying, having a loved one who is either fighting in Gaza or is being held in Gaza, as far as I'm concerned, you can say whatever you want, you can do whatever you want. I know many of these people. I know many families who have loved ones who have fought in Gaza, who have loved ones who were killed in Gaza, or who are being held hostage, or were held hostage and have since been killed. And I don't begrudge any of them, or I just could never question what they do.
Dan was the coalition authorities, provisional coalition authorities spokesperson in Iraq during the war. So he knows what it's like to communicate on the mark, as he just did. So, Dan, I agree with you. You were saying hostage families, survivor families, fallen soldier families can say whatever they want. No, I agree with that. And I've had Rachel Goldberg on this show before Hirsch was executed, and it was moving, so deeply moving. So I don't disagree with any of that, but I don't hear anything from families of fallen soldiers anywhere.
Yeah,
and I'm just wondering if they speak up.
Again, I can't emphasize it enough. Obviously, like you and I agree, Hugh, families who are suffering or trying to get their loved ones out could and should say whatever they want. My frustration is the media over here is focused exclusively on those voices that are just attacking Israel's government and just criticizing Israel's government, which they have every right to do, meaning the protesters have every right to do. There are some within this community of either fallen soldiers or even some of the hostages who don't necessarily agree with what some others in the hostage movement or some others in Israeli society are advocating for. They're not as cohesive a movement as we would think. I had Maya Roman, who's a family member of a woman who was released in the first hostage deal and who's related to Carmel Gott, who was just killed along with Hirsch among the 6 hostages that were executed a little over a week ago. She was on my podcast a few months ago, and she made the point that, for instance, if you are a male soldier being held hostage in Gaza, you may not like some of these hostage deals being discussed because your loved one is probably not going to get released in the first phase. And if there's going to be a hostage deal, you want everyone to be released. You don't want these phased releases, because if they're keeping the male soldiers for a future date, it's safe to assume that there's a good chance they'll never be released, or it could be very long before they release. So they're not on board with some of what the hostage movement is advocating for. If you are a soldier, if you're a family member of a soldier fighting in Gaza, if the lesson from that Hamas takes away, that taking hostages yields enormous exchanges, enormous benefits, does that incentivize Hamas to take hostages in the future? If you're a soldier, if you're the loved one of a soldier fighting in Gaza, do you want to put your loved one to have that added risk that Hamas is looking at them as a potential hostage? So there's so many equities, Hugh. There's so many cross currents. There's so many different players and different people who have different concerns and different issues, and keeping track of it all is very hard. And I just think covering this issue the way the American media has been covering it, as though it's a monolith, it's this cohesive unit all calling for the same thing, I think is it doesn't give respect and fair coverage to what's really going on.
I couldn't agree with you more, and that's why I appreciate Call Me Back, because you will often bring on people from both sides of every conversation, and there aren't just both sides, there are 30 sides. And if you're not listening to Call Me Back and you're listening to this podcast right now or tomorrow morning, you've got to, if you want to be smart about this war. And by the way, we got 2 carrier groups there, got 19 American ships. We could be in the war by the time you hear this. It is that kind of a hair trigger. Dan, I wouldn't have known about Habib Reddick Gur, who is now often on this program, without you. I wouldn't have known about Nadav Ayal. I wouldn't have known about all these people. But I also have to kind of guess on their politics. And after a year or 11 months, I think Haviv is the closest I've heard to an objective, completely, maybe center-right, just a bit, journalist. And I think Nadav is a man of the left. And he's never said that. But when Nadav wouldn't answer your direct question in the penultimate podcast about Yair Lapid, which I did not know, I was shocked. I stopped. I was running, and I stopped, replayed it to hear it. He said that this coalition government is a murderer's government and that Netanyahu has blood on his hands. Did I hear that right? Because I was just shocked. You asked Nadal about that, and he avoided your question 3 times.
I think the rhetoric, Hugh, by some on the Israeli left, not all, some are being very responsible. I just interviewed last night Benny Gantz at a conference in D.C., which is where I am right now. He was very responsible, even though he has strong disagreements with Netanyahu. I think some of the rhetoric among some on the Israeli left has gotten out of control, way too hot. Lapid had resisted that for a while, and I'm disappointed to say he hasn't. The way some of these political leaders are talking about Netanyahu and others in the Israeli government, I think is blood on their hands. Murderers government. I mean, it's just I think we need to take a step back and remind people and remember Hamas orchestrated and executed this massacre. You can disagree with how the Israeli government has responded at various points, but let's not forget who the enemy is. And I think sometimes the rhetoric gets so heated. Yeah.
And I also
and by the way, Hugh, let me just tell you, it also hurts Israel over here. And that's the point I tried to make.
Yes.
In one of these conversations I had on the podcast, it hurts it hurts Israel over here, because I said I'm doing a series of TV interviews trying to defend Israel, trying to present Israel's dilemmas and challenges, which is what I try to do on my podcast too. And I push back at some of the people interviewing me. I won't mention names, but I push back on them saying, you do remember there's this organization called Hamas, right? It's like, what about Netanyahu this and Netanyahu that? And so the Israeli government, its prime minister, are the obstacles to peace and prosperity out of this war. And I'm like, you do know there's this organization called Hamas, right? And they're like, look, Dan, we're just citing what some Israelis are saying in our questions. And in fairness to these reporters, they have a point. I think some of the Israelis who are taking to the streets are not thinking about Israel's image and the challenges Israel faces in the international arena and the impact they're having on it.
I co-moderated with Lester Holt and Kristen Welker the debate in November, and the first hour was devoted to the 10/7 massacre. And I hope tomorrow night, David Muir and Lindsay begin by asking, did Israel have the right to respond preemptively against Hezbollah? And if they see Iran doing the same thing they did in April, making the preparations to strike, does Israel have a right to hit Iran preemptively? Because I'd like to know what Kamala Harris says about that. But our media, I don't have a lot of hopes that Muir and Lindsay will ask good questions. Do you?
On this issue, no, but I don't want to judge until I see them perform. But look, we know that Kamala Harris has been on the wrong side of most, not all, of most of the decisions that the administration has made since October 7th about how to deal with this war. And she's never been challenged on that. We know that Tim Walz, even as recently as last week, expressed some views about Israel and where to go forward with this war that were shocking to me. No mention of Hamas, talking as though everything's on track to reach some sort of hostage deal and temporary ceasefire, but for Benjamin Netanyahu. Literally, I mean, this interview he gave was jarring. So there are a lot of serious questions for what could be this future administration in terms of how it conducts itself with Israel, in the Middle East, and foreign policy more broadly. And I just hope this is addressed in the debate tomorrow.
I just want Dan to talk a little bit about, first, my statement about Netanyahu. I've only interviewed him once when Bibi came out, spent an hour with him. Fascinating career. I am very glad that he is the prime minister of Israel right now, because he's the most experienced person with war and peace and making a bad decision and making good decisions. He lost a brother in a terrorist, a rescue of hostages held by terrorists in Entebbe. And I think Netanyahu has the experience necessary to deal with this situation in a way that maybe only Bennett understands, Naftali Bennett. And maybe Benny Gantz. But Benny Gantz hadn't been a prime minister yet. So I don't know that he knows everything that goes on. So what do you think of Netanyahu? I mean, obviously, like Churchill came back in World War II, and he had all the experiences and the mistakes of World War I to draw upon. I think Israel is well served by having an experienced cabinet right now. And then I have one last question after that, Dan.
Look, Netanyahu is very experienced. I know him well. I've known him for a long time. I think he's accomplished some extraordinary things for Israel and for the West. By the way, I think he's been an important voice on behalf of the West, not just Israel. I think that it's not about his smarts or capabilities or experience. I think he has all those things. I think that there is a breakdown in trust of Netanyahu right now among the Israeli public. I don't know, Hugh, how to repair that in wartime, but there's deep skepticism. For instance, that's why I did this recent episode on the podcast called Bibi's Message versus Bibi the Messenger. And this was this conversation that you were citing, which I had between Nadav Ayel and Amit Segel, two Israeli journalists, one from the right, one from, one's right, one Nadav, as you say, center left. He wouldn't call him that, but you and I can. I'm needling him a little bit here if he's listening. I was just with him last night in D.C. Look, the problem is the arguments Netanyahu is laying out, for instance, on the Philadelphia corridor, as we were talking about earlier, are very, very reasonable. And in fact, a lot of Israelis agree with what he's saying. But there's been some kind of breakdown where he can't break through. He can't persuade. And so the question is why. Now, that could change. Maybe with more success, that can change. But right now, he's been a little stuck. And so I think it's not just about his capabilities, which I think he has. It's not just about his experience, which I think he has in spades. It's not even about his vision, which I think he has. The question is, do you reach a point where, when you've served in office so long, think Margaret Thatcher, there was just a point at which, for all her experience and all her talent and all her vision, the public, and including the Tories in the UK, just were exhausted by her, and were ready for a change. And so I do think there's something akin to that going on right now in Israel.
Well,
obviously,
if he were to declare,
obviously exacerbated by October 7th, which goes without saying, that
if he were to declare, Dan, that he's going to finish this government and he's not running again, but he is going to finish this government, and this government is rock solid. It's got 64 seats out of 120. It's not going anywhere until 2026 or 2027. So get used to it. I'm here, and we're not going anywhere. And you got the far right, hard right parties who agree with him on that. I would like that, but I have to add one question. John Podhoretz last week, and I listened to every commentary podcast as well, said it was his belief that Yoav Gallant's spirit is broken, that he doesn't think the war can be won, and he wants to get out of Gaza to the extent possible, repair, get ready for the war in Lebanon. I don't know what to think about that statement because Gallant has been a lion. What do you think about John's statement that he believes Gallant's spirit is broken?
I don't think Gallant's spirit is broken. I think Gallant, from the beginning of this war, was a big believer in the idea that Israel should go to the north first and deal with Hamas and Gaza later, that they needed to surprise Hezbollah in the north, that ultimately Hezbollah was the bigger threat to Israel, 10 times the capabilities, 10 times the weapons, 10 times the personnel, not just the number of weapons, the 200,000 rockets, but the sophistication of some of those capabilities, precision guided, could really wreak havoc in central Israel. That it was inevitable that Hezbollah was going to follow Hamas, and Israel should preempt and strike Hezbollah. And so I think Gallant believes that Israel's reached a point where it really needs to focus on the north, and it needs to kind of, put Gaza to bed, so to speak, for now, and focus on Hezbollah. So I just think he's frustrated from a strategic standpoint. I don't think he's lost his spirit, or I don't agree with John on that.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know, because I trust both you and John a lot on these subjects. Last question. I want you to try, and it's impossible because he's a sociopath, to think like Sinwar. You execute 6 hostages, one of them an American citizen as well as an Israeli citizen. We've mentioned Hirsch. And 500,000 Israelis turn out to yell at Netanyahu. Doesn't that tell Sinwar that the next best move is to execute 12 hostages and get 1 million Israelis in the street? I don't understand it. Dan. It befuddles me. It leaves me wondering, don't they realize Sinwar is watching?
I'm stunned by this, Hugh. The degree to which this was just a total disregard for the U.S. and basic disrespect for the U.S. and a sense that, like, we don't care what the U.S. thinks, was shocking to me. Many believe that Israel, that Sinwar is not intimidated by Israel and is happy to have a fight with Israel, but is concerned about the U.S. And the U.S. has a certain level of indirect influence on Sinwar. I don't. I mean, just the hostage video they released of Hirsch Goldberg, Poland. It was like geared. It felt to me like in many respects it was geared towards an American audience and specifically the American administration. And so I think we need to wake up here. We here in the U.S. that this is a terror organization that's not intimidated by the United States.
And I'll close with this. Keep doing what you're doing. I think it's very difficult to do public events, and I appreciate your courage in doing them right now, because I was up in Harvard Yard during the summer. I'm very deeply ashamed of my alma mater. I would be very afraid to be a Jewish student on a elite campus right now. I think there are bad people on all these campuses, and I'm glad you're out there spreading the word, but I think Call Me Back is vital at this point, Dan. So good luck in your conversation tonight with Dave McCormick. When you bring people along and doing all these public events, and people should subscribe to Call Me Back. Anything I have left off that you want to add?
No, I appreciate it. Just if you're in the Philly area tonight, 8:00 p.m. with Dave, as you said, and September 24th in New York City at the Stryker Center, a live recording of Call Me Back, and we'll keep promoting these events as they come up.
Good. I'll talk to you in a month or so. Dan Senor, thank you so much.
Hugh,
Follow him
thanks
on
for everything
X.
you're doing.
You bet. Bye-bye.